generation believes it is living through unprecedented change: artificial intelligence, climate change, geopolitical uncertainty, economic disruption. But what if the biggest transformation of all is something we are rarely talking about? For the first time in human history, millions of us will spend 20, 30, or even 40 years in adulthood after the age of 60. We've added decades to life expectancy. Yet our education system, careers, retirement models, healthcare systems, and even our assumptions about aging were designed for a very different world. We've added years to life. The question is, have we redesigned life itself? My guest today, Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, believes that we are trying to live 100-year lives using the 20th century operating system. She's a globally recognized thought leader on leadership, longevity, gender, and generational balance, CEO of 21st, author, speaker, advisor, and a host of the Four Quarter Lives podcast. Avivah, welcome to Hit the Reset.
Thank you so much.
Avivah, you seem to have spent much of your career challenging assumptions, right? You started by helping organizations rethink gender, leadership, and talent. Yet over the last decade, you've increasingly become one of the strongest voices on longevity and generational balance. So what was the moment when you realized that longevity wasn't just another demographic trend?
Well, it is another demographic trend. It's just that I think just like gender, I think these two phenomenal trends of my lifetime, the first one being the extraordinary rise of women in the 20th century, their massive arrival into labor forces and talent pools, and then this next rise. And what really woke me up, I think, to it was partly the pandemic, which hit a lot of older people first, obviously, and so drew attention to that segment, but also a book that I'm sure you have read called The 100-Year Life by Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan. And I read that and I thought, oh my God, this is the next huge thing.
So what fascinated you most? Was it the fact that people were living longer, or the fact that society seemed completely unprepared for what that meant?
Yeah, it struck me as very similar to the gender topic, a massive global shift that would impact every country, that was impacting every country, every company, every individual, every career. And those are the kind of topics that just hook me, right? It's fascinating, and they are generally underestimated. So until you get the momentum and enough pressure and people talking about it, and enough data in front of leaders to wake them up, they get underestimated. And the longer you wait, the harder it is to adapt calmly. And then you create a bit of a crisis.
I think you beautifully summarized this somewhere, saying that gender was to the 20th century what age will be to the 21st, a massive demographic and societal shift that changes almost everything, right?
I mean, listen, in my lifetime, and I benefited from sort of surfing both these curves. I call it first the rise of women, and now the rise of the old.
It's true.
It's true. And I happen to be both of those things now. So
similar with me as well.
Some personal skin in this game.
Me too, I guess. If you think about it, almost every longevity conversation starts with the question, how do we live longer, right? But your focus has been around, what do we do with those extra years? So would you like to share your perspective on why longevity is primarily a societal story rather than just a healthcare story?
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be really a healthcare story at all. The phenomenal success of science in the 20th century gifted all of us almost everywhere an extra 30 to 40 decades. No, 30 to 40 years, 3 or 4 decades of extra life. That's already done. So, the healthcare story of how we're going to extend further interests me relatively little, because as I look around, I don't think that necessarily we've quite adapted yet to the already extended lives that we currently have. This notion, the way we think of working and retiring still quite early, and the struggle that we will have simply to adapt to the current lifespans, let alone what may be in the pipe, given all the trillions of dollars now being invested in strange and I think not entirely necessary further life extensions.
Yeah, but that's just in the recent past. But if you look over the past years, when you talk about age or when you talk about longevity, it's only about healthcare, right? I mean, people who talk only about health and how do you extend your life rather than what you were talking about in terms of what do you do with those extra years. So,
What's astonishing is every year, everywhere, for much of the last century, lifespans have been going up. I mean, part of it is we have reduced child mortality. That was a huge early 20th century issue. Now those levels of child mort, so the average life expectancy, grew very, very fast. And then we are living not only longer, but we are living healthier. I mean, all the people working in healthcare have very effectively built systems and helped us understand what were some of the pillars of longevity. I hope now most of your listeners will know that there are some fundamental basics to living both a longer and healthier life: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and relationships, right? Those are the those are the pillars, and I think a lot of people are beginning to harness those more effectively, just to live those extra decades well and to thrive and to contribute long beyond what they might have thought of earlier in their lives.
yeah. On a lighter vein, Aviva, if you had one slide and 5 minutes with every prime minister, president, and CEO tomorrow, what demographic reality would you make them understand?
A really simple one: that for the first time in human history, we have moved from a demographic pyramid to a demographic square. Really simple. One picture: triangle to square or rectangle. And I think that summarizes this new demographic era that we're living in, where for all of human history, we've been used to very few old people and lots of young people. And now, for the first time, we have as many old as young. In some countries now, we have more over 65-year-olds than under 15-year-olds. We have never experienced this before. So it changes the shapes of populations, labor forces, throws up the whole issue of fertility and people having children or not, and what that does to our companies and our countries, let alone our careers and our couples.
So, what's the one biggest misconception policymakers have about the aging population today?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that it's a bad news story, that it's a crisis. It's terrible. Oh my God, old, oh, lots of old people. And then we think of people, with canes and disabilities and struggle to just be contributing to the general overall good. And I think that's a very serious ageist misconception that it will take us many years to overcome. So the earlier we start, the better. But yeah, we have to basically rebrand old, and we have to make it a cool, sexy, aspirational time of life that doesn't look anything like our conception of old today.
That's true. So, when you look around the world today, who gets it? Which countries are preparing intelligently for longevity, and which countries are sleepwalking into the demographic crisis, according to you?
Well, I think most of them are slightly still taken aback by this pace of change. There are very few countries that are adapting very well. I think the rich world had a little bit more time to age. The Asian countries are aging extraordinarily fast, and so don't necessarily have the preparation and infrastructure, pension systems, social care systems to navigate this shift. You have a few countries that are focusing in strategically on the topic. Singapore is everybody's poster child for how to navigate longevity, but I think you'll see India is fast aging. I mean, we're just learning that the fertility rate fell to below 1.9, that's kind of big news. And we already know that China started shrinking back in 2022. So the two biggest countries on the planet have gotten old before they've really gotten rich. And so I think that creates this extraordinary challenge for how to navigate, how to make people age and thrive in parallel.
Interestingly, say about 20 years ago, or yeah, both China and India were trying to reduce the population, right? They had this one child policy. People were very apprehensive. And there were memes about India being the most populous country and so on. And within a span of 20 years, things have completely changed. It's like the fertility's come down. Youngsters don't want to get married, don't want to have children. They would rather have pets than children. So it's a very interesting change.
And
Since
very
you
sudden, as you say, I mean, it's so sudden, right? And these kinds
raised,
of reversals are hard for governments and individuals and companies to navigate. So what do you do next, right? And next, the problem is if you stay sort of wired on the way things used to be, even just 20 years ago, you're not going to have the labor forces or the talent to keep your economic engines going.
yeah, I have questions on that in the next topic. So, since you spoke about Singapore, when the government takes it up as something to be done, then things get done, right? I mean, if it's for Singapore, the government is actively involved in it. You Yesterday's newspaper spoke about having many more ATMs all over the place, so the elder folks don't have to walk too much and they can pick up, collect the money wherever they can. They talk about AI and financial literacy programs. Urban design is discussed almost on a regular basis, keeping this demographic in mind. So when the government realizes that this is absolutely critical, I think things start to move. Until then, it's just, people are talking about it, but you don't see too many changes happening, right? So, what can Asia learn from Europe and vice versa when it comes to policies or when it comes to how to adapt to this demographic shift?
Well, I mean, I think it doesn't have too much to learn because it's a little bit different, right? It has a different culture
No,
and a different pace. But I think what it can see maybe is that social care, public healthcare systems, the faster they can transfer, which not very many rich countries have done very effectively, right? The faster they can transfer from trying to heal the sick to trying to prevent illness and frailty from building up, which means trying to start much, much earlier on education, getting young people to understand this new longevity wave, the better. So it's how much attention and how much priority this gets in the government. And it's tough in countries like India where there's so many young people. It's how do you start educating and enrolling young people to understand and embrace this new longevity and what does it mean for them? And then the other challenge, of course, is financial and pension systems. And the question is, even the rich world is struggling to make sure its pension systems are viable given these new demographic shapes. So in countries that don't have these systems, they're going to have to individualize savings and teach financial literacy to people younger so that they have a little bit more time and understanding of things like basic saving and compound interest and try and get financial systems to support individuals, which, will be tough in a country as populous and widespread as India.
that's true. Yeah. So, since you spoke about pension, I'm going to shift to one of society's sacred cow, retirement. Okay, the current script speaks about study, work, and retire, and that was probably designed for life expectancy that was dramatically shorter, right? If we were designing societies from scratch today, would retirement even exist?
I just don't like the word. So I think I would navigate vocabulary slightly differently.
Okay.
And I would probably adjust the entire career cycle and life cycle to integrate new realities. So you probably have heard of my 4-quarter life model,
Yeah.
where if we have these long 100-year lives, I'm suggesting that there are 4 quarters to those lives. I will have to design more intentionally to integrate what the needs, motivations, and priorities of each of those quarters is. I can go in and describe them if you want for
Sure.
your
Yeah.
audience. Well, I mean, you spoke about the old model, which is, learn, earn, and then retire. I think we're going to now see four sort of cycles, which I call Q1 from 0 to 25 is grow. That's still, we learn, we educate, grow up in cultures, societies, and families. Q2 is, I think, what we used to call adulthood. It's the
Hmm.
years from 25 to 50. And I call that phase achieve, where we have to sort of tick all the boxes that society teaches us. So we have to, achieve families, careers, reputations, family building, ego building, all the sort of foundations of adulthood are built or not in Q2. And then I think we come to this really new chapter. And I think this is the really new thing of these longer lives. It's Q3, which I call becoming. And it's the 25 years after 50, from 50 to 75. And this is, I think, the sort of promise of these longer lives is we get this extra chapter of healthy, engaged, committed life. We've managed to tick a lot of the boxes that were expected of us in Q2. We arrive in Q3 able to focus a little bit more, not so much on extrinsic expectations, but much more on intrinsic ones. What does our own self want to do, become, express, or impact? And now we have a lot of time to explore that and build it, which we didn't really have before. And I think careers have been almost entirely focused on just Q2. And so basically, what we're saying is careers, work, impact can now be doubled. And the aperture of governments, companies, and individuals can broaden from just one Q2 slice to Q2 and Q3, which is of benefit to, I think, a lot of people. If you're in Q2, the message is, relax a little bit. You've got a lot of time. You're going to have a marathon to navigate. So buckle up, do the things you want to do in Q2. Don't make crazy choices. Don't think it's make or break before 50 and then you're done. And if you're in Q3, the message is, you know, lean in. This is potentially some of the best, most impactful years of your life. Are you taking advantage of them? Don't slow down too early because there's also Q4, which is yet another few years or decades after 75, which are again increasingly healthy. We're basically pushing back morbidity and real old age later and later. So Q4 hopefully is a time of what I call harvesting, where we will be able to enjoy the fruits of what we have built in the first 3 quarters. So retirement was this weird notion that was very short lived. I mean, it was a bit of the Industrial Revolution and the early 20th century, and it was introduced back when people lived a lot less and was kind of programmed so that you died very shortly before or after that official retirement age. Now we're living decades after official retirement age. And the idea of sort of retiring or moving away from life, engagement, contribution is not, I think, the way you want to design either societies or one's own life. It's not really good for your health, mental or physical. You want to stay connected with people. You want to be doing things. You want to have a reason to get up in the morning. All those things, I think, contribute to why we have to rethink and reword the life stages. And I think we conflate too often work and money. You know, you have to do something for a little bit longer than we're thinking, whether or it's paid employment. And I just think in many countries, it will have to be paid employment because
Yeah,
we will not
so
otherwise
true.
have money to make it through these longer lives.
It sounds good. It sounds something that we have to do. But if you look at people today, a lot of people in their 40s, I mean, in the 50s and 60s, I'm using the bad word again, the retire, they believe that they are going to lose their identity, and they withdraw from the society. They're not ready yet. The current situation is that people are not ready. I'm saying, what do I do with my life? And if you look at the corporates, the question to you is, are the corporate leaders ready for that reality? Because we've set up a platform called Renew, and the objective is to get, we call them the senior professionals, back into the workplace. And as you rightly say, it has to be a paid job. When we meet the CHRs in all these corporates, they like the idea. They say, oh, it's very interesting that you're doing it, fantastic. But not one is willing to change their corporate culture to say, okay, let's have gigs, let's have fractional roles, let's get these people in. It is not easy at all, because I don't think the corporates have understood what the reality is. And from a positive perspective, this is a gold mine that they should actually be utilizing, but they are not. So how do we address that, Aviva?
So that's a huge challenge, right? I mean, I think
Right.
governments and individuals have been a little bit quicker on this bandwagon of longevity and its shifts than the corporate world has. And the corporate world may not shift until it really, really has to very
Mm.
often. I also think part of the problem is how we engage with the corporate world. And we really need for them to understand and adapt, the whole kind of system and culture to this new era. You've got to get it up on the strategic agenda. You've said this already earlier, right? Until it's on the leadership exco agenda, and that team understands just how much it's going to impact their key markets, their consumers, their workforce. They're just not going to be that interested. Right now, everybody's kind of AI addled, right? That's where all the focus and the attention is. AI, AI, AI. This demographic thing, which I think is on a par as a topic, is completely absent in my experience from the exco agenda. And so the challenge is, how do we get it there? So efforts have been focused on getting it on business school agendas, get it into the business school, get it into executive education, make sure it's in the leadership development programs, because we've basically got to wake up leaders. This reminds me very much of my work on gender 30 years ago, right? You have to make it and prove compellingly with good data that it will both be a huge opportunity if they do it right, and a huge risk if they don't embrace it. And I think some of the people, the communications challenge is enormous. And I don't think we always have the right people communicating in the right way. I think too often it's carried more as a sub issue. You know, it's an ageism issue. It's a people issue. It's, are you being nice to people? It's not nice to treat old people badly. That's not going to work in the corporate setting, not in today's kind of not particularly empathetic world. So I think we have to be a little bit more urgent and get better data to make the business case for why this is so key. And I think very often the in my experience in front of excos, sometimes the more compelling argument is the consumer argument, right? Just how big the consumer segment is, how much of consumers are in this new Q3, how their expectations and demands are changing, how they hold all the assets in most
Mm.
countries. I
Yeah.
think the challenge in India is you still have enough young people demographically that companies can ignore this for a while. But India also has one of the fastest aging populations in the world. And so I think we've got to get much better at communicating this new reality and its consequences.
Hmm. Yeah. True. So, what do you think is the biggest misconception that younger generations have about aging? You've you've spoken to you're into this generational balance, so I just wanted to know from both angles, what's the biggest misconception younger generations have about aging, and what's the biggest misconception older generations have about younger people?
Well, I think it's not just younger people. I think actually what's very interesting is everybody, the
Hmm.
whole world, at all ages are ageist, right? We are
Okay.
fundamentally, unconsciously ageist. So most people, the stereotype of what older people are is, a little slower, a little less well informed, a little tech phobic, not very much online, not very open to the new or to learning. And I think most of that has been proved not true. But I think older individuals also hold those ideas about themselves. There's this thing called internalized ageism. So I think the whole world and slightly different cultures have slightly different views and respect for older people. But in fast changing corporate worlds and settings, for example, we don't always have a lot of patience with the older group. And I think the young, are very often just think the old are kind of past it. They are much faster and much more, on all kinds of social media, and they think older people are not. And I think the other thing is they think that the older are capturing and holding, which is not entirely false, a lot of assets, positions, and power. If you look at who's running the key countries around the world, there's an unfortunate number of 70-year-old plus men who are wielding power and don't look like they want to let it go, which I think affects very much how people see the older, right? They're still active, but not always in very positive ways.
And that used to be my question, saying that somebody in their 60, if he or she wants to get back to work, it's a small job in a small department in one of the organizations. And there's a lot of resistance. But at the same time, you have a 70 and 80-year-old male who's running countries, so there is something missing somewhere, right?
It depends how good a job you think they're doing. But yes, on the one hand, you're right, is I think these old men in power, on the one hand, show that you can still be active and going. If they're terrible leaders, which many of them are, they're a counterexample. They're proof of just how awful and dangerous older people can be if they stay around too long. So we're getting both lessons kind of at the same time.
You spent years studying both gender and generational balances, right? Dynamics. So, which challenge are organizations less prepared for? Is it the gender balance or the generational balance?
I think you would be surprised how completely parallel these two subjects are. I think both were I almost think the longevity topic was easier to predict from earlier on. It's been in the data. This is not a new story. People have been talking about this for 30, 40 years, right? It's only recently kind of hit the mainstream consciousness, but it was in the data. Demographics is this very slow moving iceberg. It's a lot like climate change. So I think it was easier to sort of predict, but I think what perhaps wasn't so easy to predict was this extraordinarily fast drop in fertility rates and the shrinking and disappearance of the young. And I think people are just still expecting that the future will go to the young. And I think in a growing number of countries, the future will go to the old. They vote more, they have more money, they have more influence. And so for the foreseeable future, this is a very different world. And I think that's hard to wake up to. I think I compared it to my gender topic. I used to always say leaders had to become gender bilingual. They wanted to hire women, work with women, sell to women who happen to be increasingly well off and, hold greater degrees of both education and purchasing power. They had to learn how to engage them, what motivated them, how to speak with them. And I call that gender bilingual. I think the same is true on generations. Now we need to become longevity literate. We need to become fluent in the language of different life phases and generations and what they want and what motivates them and how we serve them and connect with them better. And that takes the same sort of leadership education. Let's get everybody to kind of get and the data and the needs and this new cycles that people will have across these 60-year careers and 5 generations in the workforce. How do we work together? And it helps if you become generationally fluent. We sort of managed it somewhat for women.
Yeah.
I've become much more gender bilingual in many organizations, not all of them. I think it's just a matter of time and
Yeah,
on
that's
the
true.
bandwagon.
No.
The one big difference between gender and longevity is actually a positive one, is that unlike women, every single human becomes old. So
True.
it's never just a story about somebody else. It happens to me, and that helps a lot in getting people on board with it.
It's so true. So someone was saying, if you're lucky, you're going to grow old. So
Exactly.
have to consider yourself lucky to be there.
Exactly.
On a lighter note, Aviva, imagine tomorrow morning you wake up and you become the prime minister, probably seventh prime minister in UK.
There's a little bit of a race on right now. So
Yes, I know. You have political capital, no bureaucracy, no opposition, just one mission of preparing your country for the longevity revolution. What's the first thing you would do?
I think I would really harness and welcome all ages into both politics and into the workforce. So I would probably there's already no retirement age in the UK, right? There's some companies that have it, but there's no official retirement age, so that's pretty good. But I think I would get much more younger people into government, like really say government needs to be cross-generational. And then I would probably start really supporting older people to stay in work. And that's through a campaign of education, retirement education, financial education, but basically incentivize people to stay in the workforce much longer with sort of positive incentives.
And what's the first policy you would abolish?
Probably, again, something to do with retirement. I think we have a real problem of pension system invisibility. I think people don't understand pensions. And I think I would abolish the sort of the financial obscurity of everything to do with financial planning for longevity. We got to get the finance industry to be way more transparent on what people have and what they will have. And just, communication is phenomenally bad in the financial sector. I'm routinely amazed at how illegible everything to do with finance and pensions. So I think I would try and attack that very quickly.
What would your message be to CEOs who still think aging is somebody else's problem?
I mean, listen, the numbers are really pretty easy to garner. I would say what percentage of their labor force is over and under 50? What percentage of their consumer base is over and under 50? Who has the purchasing power in their home country, and do they know how to serve it or not? And if you wanted to throw in a little kicker, in many rich countries, I would also just check what's their pension risk of all the pensions that they are already committed to, and are they actually understanding its impact on their balance sheet?
Interestingly, there's one metrics that corporates have to submit in Singapore, which is how many employees are over 60, right? So that's okay, which means that what they've done is if you are within the organization, if you're in the system, the government supports you, saying that you can stay on, and the retirement age keeps increasing. It's 64, they probably will move all the way to 67. But if you have stepped out of the system for various reasons, for healthcare, for personal reasons, and you want to get back, it's very difficult. And that, I think, would be a metrics that makes more sense, saying how many 60-year-old did you get back into the workforce rather than saying how many are above a certain age, don't you think?
Again, I think it's, what phase are they at? The first number, yeah. Ask how many people are over 60. That's a good wake up call, right? The second number is to get more sophisticated, more granular, and start measuring exits and returns. The whole issue of return to work is one we know well from work on gender, right?
Yes.
We've done this with women who had children, and how many could you get back in? I think a lot of the challenge around Q3 isn't actually 60 and over. The challenge is we have to get working on this topic much earlier in people's careers. If they're in their 60s and they've left, it's very hard to get them back in. If they're 50, and this is where people start to drop off from work for all kinds of reasons, that's where you have to intervene. So one of the real wake-up calls is don't wait too late. Start
Yes.
educating your 40-year-olds about longer careers. Make sure they know how to navigate both health and wealth and what they know to stay relevant,
Hmm.
and skill them up and upskill them while they're still in your system and before, hopefully, they've left. Because, yes, it's the later you wait for all of these things, the harder it is to recoup.
Okay, I would like to end with a question that we ask all our guests on Hit the Reset. As somebody listening today may be standing at the reset point, they may be 35, 55, or 75, and they're wondering whether it's too late to change careers, too late to learn something new, or too late to reinvent themselves. So, what would you like to say to them?
Yeah, obvious. Never too late. I mean, I went back to school at 60. Increasingly, we're seeing people reinvent in all kinds of directions. And I think we will see a world where we will become, I hope, increasingly good at transitions. This is the one skill in a world that's going to be upended by AI and changing economic realities. We need to become really skilled transitionists. And that means, staying up to date with what we know, being curious, being ready to learn at any age. And it's just as true at 35 as it is at 55 or 75. And I think we keep learning, if we're lucky, until we die.
One final question. When historians look back 50 years from now, what do you hope they'll say we got right about the longevity revolution?
I would really love the world to understand women enough to be able to understand how to adapt countries so that couples could actually have the number of children they would like to have. And otherwise, in 50 years, we will start to see peak populations begin to decline and countries shrink because we simply haven't reproduced. I think that is the sort of existential challenge of our time. I think it's a profound misunderstanding of working women and dual income couples. And I think it's also a challenge, as you mentioned right up at the beginning, of getting young people actually to meet each other. And if we don't manage to procreate, I think our human species will be in for some turbulent times in 50 years.
That was a fantastic conversation. And I'm going to summarize. I'm taking one of your quotes again. What people want as they age is not fundamentally different from what they've always wanted. Autonomy, dignity, connection, and the ability to make choices about how they live. In longer lives, those outcomes depend less on age itself and far more on whether the systems around us are built to support us. Avivah, thank you so much for joining us on Hit the Reset.
My great pleasure, Malu. Really fun.